Hello, my name is Stephen Coutcher, and I'm currently a pre-theologian studying for the Diocese of Providence. I'd like to take this fifth week of Lent to reflect with you about the cross and what God's will for us in this life is. So in this week, we hear in the Gospel, Jesus is talking to some Greek philosophers who come to visit him from the East. And Jesus speaks to them, and he says that a grain of wheat must die in order to produce much fruit. He's referring to the Son of Man, prophesying about the death that he would endure upon the cross. And he says that so too as the grain of wheat must die to produce much fruit, the Son of Man must die in order to save us from our own sin and save us from eternal damnation. So Jesus says this, and he lives his entire life with this in focus. He is focused solely on what the Father's will is for him in this life. God willed for his Son to suffer that death. That was the purpose that Jesus served to coming to the earth, was to save us from sin. So we hear again in this gospel, and more towards the end of it, Jesus says, I am troubled now, again speaking about his death, yet what should I say? Father, save me from this hour? But it was for this purpose that I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. In that, Jesus is saying, it's not my will that matters, Father. It's your will that matters, and it is my duty to carry out that will. Jesus says he could have said no to the cross. He could have said, no, that is too much of a burden for me to bear. But what good would that do? That wasn't the purpose Jesus was put on earth to serve. And he sets an example for each one of us by saying, it's not my way, Father, it's your way. So too in our life, how often do we say, I know what God wants me to do, but I'm not going to do that, and we go and sin. Jesus sets the example that's against that. Jesus took up the cross. He suffered death. He walked to Calvary. He endured all that suffering and temptation to save us, an unsurmountable act of sacrificial love. So if the Son of Man was obedient even unto death, to death on a cross, what excuse do we have in our life not to be obedient to God the Father? My pastor often says, this isn't Burger King. You can't have it your way. And it's true. We can't have it our way. We must have it God's way. And God wants us to have it his way because he knows that it is only through his way that we can be made happy. Doing God's will is what will ultimately bring us happiness in the end. It may not be the easiest thing to do. It may not be the most politically correct thing to do. But it is the glorious thing to do. Jesus says, Father, glorify your name. In the Latin text, that word is pater clarifica nomen tuum. If you recall the second week of Lent, my brother seminarian Michael gave a great reflection in which he talked about the Latin word claritas, which means light. If you remember the Transfiguration, Jesus goes up on Mount Tabor, and he brings forth just a foretaste of his divinity. He's made bright, he's made illustrious. Light shines through him. And it is through that light and through that brightness that God's divinity is just shown to us, a little foretaste of heaven. Here too, Jesus says, Pater clarifica, that same word, Father, make bright, make glorious, make illustrious your name. And it's only through that it's only made bright, it's only made illustrious because it was doing the Father's will. It was the acceptance of the Father's will willingly. Again, we hear in this week's gospel, God the Father responds to his Son in the next line, using that same word. He says, et clarificavi et iterum clarificabo, which means I have both glorified it and I will glorify it again. And I will make it illustrious through the passion, death, and resurrection. You see, for every cross, there is a resurrection. There is always another side to it. So for us in our lives, we must think that we must go about setting to discover what God's will is for us. Maybe that's the priesthood. Maybe that's religious life. Maybe that's the married life. Whatever it is, we must be open to hearing what God wants us to do, not what we want to do. It is only God's way that will truly bring us happiness. It will truly bring us fulfillment in this life. We must also say, Father, it is not my way, but thy way. Again, this week in one of the weekday Gospels, Jesus says, I do not seek my own will, but the will of the one who sent me. So too we must seek the will of the one who sent all of us, the one who sent his own Son to mount the gibbet of the cross and to suffer death to save the world, to bring everything God had outside of the limits of time and space into fulfillment. We adore thee, O Christ, and we praise thee, because by thy holy cross thou hast redeemed the world.